Thank you all for joining us today at this press conference to update you on talks about public registries in the UK. Joining us, we have the Premier Honourable Alden McLaughlin, the Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Ezra Miller, Cabinet Secretary Samuel Rose, and Jude Scott, CEO of Cayman Finance. After the Premier speaks and others speak, we'll open it up for questions. We'll bring the mic around. And after it's over, I would like for all the government officials to join for a photo, please, up in here. Okay. Thank you, Premier.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for coming on such short notice. I want to start by thanking the Leader of the Opposition and the Chairman of the CEO, of Cayman Finance for also attending this morning on very short notice, and other members of the opposition, including the independent Mr. Kenneth Bryan, to be briefed about what has transpired with respect to the ongoing issue of the imposition of public registers of beneficial ownership on the Cayman Islands as a result of the amendment made to the Sanctions and Anti-Money Laundering Bill by the UK House of Commons. As I think everyone here is aware, the matter went back to, as part of the ping-pong process, they call it, to the House of Lords on Monday, where a challenge to the egregious amendment, if I may call it that, was made by Lord Naseby, and that resulted in a considerable debate in the House of Lords by a number of significant legal luminaries, including the former President of the Supreme Court, Lord Newberger, as well as three other significant former law lords. The situation at present, as far as I'm aware, is that the bill has now received the royal assent and is now an act of Parliament. The consequence of which is that, assuming the lawfulness of what has been done, the UK government will be under an obligation by the end of December 2020, if territories have not put in place public registers of beneficial ownership, to impose the same by an order in council, which would have the effect of amending the relevant local legislation. So as I understand it, that is the present state of play. I should say that the efforts by Lord Naseby are greatly appreciated. He's been a long-standing supporter of the Cayman Islands and is the current vice chair of the all-party parliamentary group for Cayman in the UK Parliament. Those efforts were encouraged and assisted by the Cayman Islands Government Office and the team that we had there, led by myself, because we felt that even though the House of Commons had done what it had done, that this issue, it was so significant that it deserved at least another last gasp effort on the legislative front to see what could be done to prevent what has transpired from transpiring. In the end, and we were quite aware before the end that this would not succeed, because the government had declined to give it its support. I had met with the Prime Minister on Tuesday and among other things, put this particular option to her, and with David Lidington, the de facto Deputy Prime Minister, again encouraging them to, as the government, to support the proposed amendment. I also met on 2 occasions with Lord Ahmad again. I understand full well the political dynamic in the United Kingdom at present, and the government was fearful that it would simply lose the vote and did not want to risk another vote loss in the present very difficult situation they find themselves as they try to navigate the Brexit the Brexit issue. So we did see, though, the merit, and I think that has been borne out by the speeches that were made, of having the House of Lords debate this issue again, to place starkly in the frame the constitutional overreach, which we continue to argue is the case, and that we believe those speeches will aid not just in any legal challenge which we make if the UK proceeds to make the Order in Council, as they are now mandated to do, but also in our efforts to have the United Kingdom enter into a fresh set of constitutional discussions with a view to putting in place the necessary constitutional safeguards to avoid this type of constitutional overreach by Parliament in the future. I raised this issue with the Prime Minister and had considerable discussions with David Lidington about it, and the UK has agreed to begin this dialogue. I have this morning written to the Prime Minister asking her to have her officials engage with the Cayman Islands government officials in London to start this process. I will be back in London on the 11th of June to attend the pre-GMC meetings, and I hope to be able to take the matter substantially forward at that particular point. I have spoken to the Leader of the Opposition and a number of the other members of the opposition about what we are proposing in that regard, and I have their support. Essentially, we are striving to have aspects of the Constitution clarified to ensure that the ability of the Parliament to legislate for the Cayman Islands and the other overseas territories is significantly restricted. In particular, we are proposing that the power currently reserved to Her Majesty under Section 125 of the Constitution, which is the section that says that Her Majesty reserves unto herself the power to legislate for the territories with respect to peace, order, and good government, that it be removed, as is the case with the Bermuda Constitution, or clarified to apply only to matters involving the most serious circumstances, such as a fundamental breakdown in public order or endemic corruption in the government, judiciary, or legislature. And further, that it be made clear that the UK's power over international affairs be confined to the enforcement and implementation of clear international obligations of the United Kingdom alone. And that it also be made clear that provided the Cayman Islands are not in breach of international standards, that the power of internal self-governance is absolute, and that the power of disallowance with respect to legislation passed by the Legislative Assembly of the Cayman Islands be removed, as is the case with the Gibraltar Constitution. So in broad strokes, those are the measures that we are going to be pressing for in terms of constitutional change to prevent this sort of constitutional overreach from occurring. This matter extends well beyond the issue of the imposition of public registers. Indeed, it extends well beyond even the implications for our financial services industry. If the United Kingdom Parliament, emboldened by what they've just done, comes to believe that they can legislate for the territories anytime they disagree with something in the territories, or anytime they believe that there should be that a certain situation should obtain within the territories, then it is not just our financial industry that is at risk, but really our very existence. If, for instance, the UK Parliament were to decide that they didn't like some aspect of our immigration legislation and felt it open to them to legislate for us, if we allow this particular situation to go unchallenged, we know what the outcome is likely to be. Similarly so with respect to voting rights or the right to stand for election. They could threaten the very basis of the way the Cayman Islands currently operates. And hence we believe that we need to do two things. One, challenge what they've currently done, and B, seek to insulate, as far as that is possible, the Cayman Islands from such further constitutional overreach. The final point I wish to make quite briefly at this point in the press briefing is that I have pointed out to the Prime Minister and to Mr. Lidington that the exchange of notes and technical protocol which the Cayman Islands and others of the territories have worked on over the course of almost 2 years, which allow the exchange of information or the access to information by law enforcement and tax regulatory authorities in the Cayman Islands swiftly, and in extreme cases in as little as 2 hours, where there is an urgent issue. That the whole premise of that arrangement, the whole premise of the agreement we reached, was that that would provide the alternative to a public registry regime. And as all of that has now been overtaken by events, and the actions of the Parliament have essentially vitiated that underlying agreement, we do not believe we have any obligation, further obligation to the United Kingdom government under that arrangement. Now, I hasten to say that that is not, and I am not suggesting that the Cayman Islands government should seek or will continue to cooperate with law enforcement and tax regulatory authorities in the United Kingdom government. That is certainly not the case. We believe that we need to continue to play the important role we do in the global fight against international crime and tax evasion. What I am simply saying is that what we do henceforth is a result of our willingness and desire to cooperate, and not as a result of any obligation we have to the United Kingdom pursuant to the technical protocol and the exchange of notes. Because the underlying premise, I repeat, for that agreement was that that would be the alternative to the implementation of a public registry regime. So, as far as business in Cayman is concerned, the position of the Cayman Islands government is that the attempt by the Parliament to legislate for this territory with respect to the imposition of public registries is unlawful. We do not accept it, and should the UK government proceed ultimately to issue an order in council to amend local legislation to impose public registries, it will be resisted through the Cayman Islands courts. We have taken the advice of two very senior members of the UK Bar in the persons of Sir Geoffrey Jowell QC and Lord David Panic QC, both highly regarded constitutional lawyers in this regard, and we are following their advice in this respect. So I think I will end there. As I said at the start, I am grateful to the Leader of the Opposition and to the CEO of Cayman Finance for coming to join me at this press briefing and to offer their views with respect to these matters. I'm also grateful, and I should publicly acknowledge the efforts and hard work of the Cabinet Secretary who accompanied me during this particular mission. And I brought him here to make sure that I say everything that is correct, and that anything I say that is wrong, he will make sure that he redresses it. So again, I think I'll end there and invite Mr. Miller to say a few words.
Good evening, everyone. First of all, let me express my sincerest gratitude to the Premier for inviting us to be a part of this press conference. At the onset, when the UK House of Commons did this act, I called the Premier and expressed the view that, and assured him that the opposition was going to support him in doing everything we could to protect the financial industry and to limit what we agree with him is a constitutional overreach by the UK. We've had discussions earlier this afternoon about his proposal to request the UK to enter into dialogue for certain changes in the Constitution, which we endorse. All my political life, I have had this fear of what was often referred to as the nuclear option by the UK, that one day they would exercise it. And unfortunately, they have chosen to do so now. Lucky for us, I think that the discriminatory way in which they did it in leaving out the Crown dependencies and overreach is so far that we have a legal battle to wage if in fact they do send down the order. And the opposition is fully prepared to stand with the Premier and his government to resist the order in council, and we're prepared to join him when the opportunity arises to enter into negotiations with the United Kingdom government to solicit the changes in the Constitution as he has outlined, which we believe will go a long way to mitigating any future action, because we are also very concerned that if they're allowed to get away with this act, there's no telling where they will stop. As the example the Premier gave when it comes to voting rights in this country and who can stand for election, we know that there are forces within our community that would like to see some changes there that we as Caymanians could never tolerate, having already given up largely economic control of our country. We certainly have to make sure that there's no way for them to take political control by allowing us to be outvoted at the polls, and for those people who don't have at least one Caymanian parent to sit in Parliament. So we will continue to support the Premier and his government in his efforts to react to this unfortunate act by the UK House of Commons, and we stand foursquare with him to protect the financial industry and the Cayman Islands in general. Thank you all.
Thank you, Premier, and also thank you for allowing us to participate here as well. First, I'd like to say that we appreciate all of the efforts of the government, and it's been a long journey, and we're still only partway through it, but we appreciate the hard work that's gone into it. Like yourself, the industry is very disappointed that this decision was ratified. The decision itself, as we all know, was what we believe an inappropriate decision. It was a discriminatory decision just on the overseas territories, not on the Crown dependencies. And it also showed the level of unfairness, because as you may recall, there was also at the same time an amendment for the UK register to require anti-money laundering to be done on entities that were setting up directly with the UK register, and that was voted down. So it really set a very poor precedent, I think, overall from a UK perspective in trying to suggest that it was properly leading the effort in combating these types of crimes. From a Cayman perspective, we are fully supportive of the efforts of the government. We've had the briefing and certainly endorse the approach. We think it's very pragmatic. We believe that the Cayman Islands, one, we don't harbor criminals, and two, when it comes to areas such as beneficial ownership, the verified ownership regime that we have is really second to none in the world. So we already have a world-class standard. When you compare that to the UK's own register, which is unverified, by far the system we have in place and having the information available to law enforcement, regulators, taxing authorities through proper requests, that is the model that we believe is appropriate and the model that we believe will continue to be the global standard in years to come. With regard to our industry and our business, this has been very disappointing, but really there's a 2.5-year period of time in which we'll continue to support the efforts of the government to make necessary changes that are prudent for the country, but also to work with the government to have the UK themselves uphold their own commitments to jurisdictions like ourselves to ensure that we're not unduly harmed by these types of actions. And if I could share with you a quote of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office themselves back in 2012. And this is from the Overseas Territories book, Security, Success, and Sustainability by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. And it was issued June 2012. There's a quote on page 32 by the UK FCO, which states, Bermuda, the British Virgin Islands, and the Cayman Islands have developed important niche positions in international financial markets. The UK government strongly believes that territories which meet financial sector international standards should be free to continue to compete in international markets without discrimination. So what we'll be seeking to do is working with our government to ensure that the UK government puts in place proper protection and measures so that the Cayman Islands and other OTs are not discriminated on by this particular measure. One, as it relates to the UK territories and the UK itself, but also more broadly. So we think there's a lot of work to be done. There is, as we've seen, there's a real lack of understanding in the UK, in Parliament, and by the influencers who seek to move these issues. And so we really need to double our efforts, double our resources. And that's our commitment, Premier, to stand with you, to make the trips, to be in the meetings. So not only are they able to hear government's perspective, but also industry's perspective and understand the level of commitment we have to global standards and also the level of commitment we have to our government.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Before I open it up to questions, I just want to explain first the absence of the Minister of Financial Services, who is away in Brussels fighting another fight with respect to the whole EU threat of blacklisting, which is looming large again. She was in via telephone on the briefing with Cayman Finance this morning and has been fully apprised of the state of play. And I also want to pay tribute to the efforts of Eric Bush, the Cayman Islands government representative in London, for his incredible efforts in positioning Cayman as well as he has over the course of the last 18 months, but in particular in helping us navigate the halls of Whitehall and Westminster, and ensuring that we have access to the heart of the United Kingdom government. Frankly, I don't know what more we could possibly have done to influence the outcome of the legislative process. We have spoken to everyone that matters in the process, not least of whom is obviously the Prime Minister. So with those few words, I'll open it up for questions.
Yeah, I'll go first then. Hello, Wendy from Cayman News Service. I have a couple of questions, but I'm going to start with legal ones. There was quite a lot of offers during that debate for those law lords that you talked to do pro bono work for you on this. So obviously you got a lot of legal advice coming at you free. I wanted to know whether you're going to take advantage of that. But also I want to ask specifically, there was talk of judicial review. So there's two possible ways of doing this, I presume, which is to challenge it now under judicial review and to wait until the order in council. So can you just explain that a little better for me to get it clear in my mind? Is it possible for you to take legal action now, or will you have to wait until they impose an order in council? And will that come down the line? So in the meantime, will you be working with them to do it if you don't take legal action right now? Do you understand what I mean? I'm just trying to get the process clear. So that's my question for the time being.
Okay, our very clear advice is that Cayman's best course of action is to challenge any decision of the UK government by ordering council to amend local legislation, which will render the issue amenable to our courts here, because the effect would be, assuming it succeeded, would be to amend local legislation. Challenging the order in council or challenging the decision of the UK Parliament in the UK brings in all of the difficulties inherent in the arguments around parliamentary supremacy. We intend to win on this particular issue, and so that is the advice the government has accepted.
Can I just clarify, just so I know? Sorry. So that means that's not going to happen until we get to the deadline, right?
That will never happen if the UK doesn't make the order in council.
So in the meantime, are you going to cooperate with them if they come along and say, okay, this is what we're going to do now? Will you be cooperating or not? From that, I know you say you're going to cooperate to continue with the crime part. I understand that, but the actual establishment of a register.
No, the requirement to establish a register would not occur until and in the event that the actual Cayman legislation was amended to require public registers.
Obviously, the law says in the UK, the British government is now obligated to assist all of the overseas territories to put in place public beneficial ownership registers. So one assumes that by that they're going to be sending some officials or whatever to work with the Ministry of Finance to do this. So if they were to come before any legislation is done or any legislation prepared, are you going to cooperate with that? That's what I'm trying to find out.
No, absolutely not. We take the position that the actions would be unlawful, and we're not going to participate in that. We would only go down that road if and when any legal challenge to the order in council or the amending legislation in Cayman were to fail, and fail at the level of an appeal to the Privy Council too. We are many years away from that event, and as we know, the political and regulatory landscape is changing so quickly that I can't even speculate what the situation will be like globally by then. As we've said before, when this becomes a global standard, Cayman is there. The issue for us is not. The issue for us is twofold, really. One, it is the privacy point. People always these days seem to conflate secrecy and privacy. The two are not the same. Pray tell me why all and sundry should know who the beneficial owner of Foster's Food Fair Limited is, as an example. Why should that be on a public register where the whole world can look and see? So there are issues around privacy that are very, very important. And we want to ensure that we comply with what is our constitutional obligation under a Bill of Rights which has been approved and put in place by none other than the UK government themselves. And I forgot what the other point is.
No, that was it.
Okay.
Because I was asking only to get the order of
Yeah,
how it would work and what would happen with the region. Thank you.
Premier, I have two questions. First of all, you talked about constitutional changes. Is it that you will be drafting something like we did with the Constitution order to take to the UK, or are you going to be hammering out that deal with them when you get to the UK? And my second question is, you talked about the exchange of notes. Is it that this agreement now will be, completely out the window, and how are you going to assess giving the information if these law authorities come to us asking for this information on tax, people who are avoiding tax?
Let me, dealing with the last point first, let me reiterate what I said at the start. It is the agreement underpinning the exchange of notes and the technical protocol that we regard as having been vitiated or overtaken by events as a result of the passage of this act. The operations that are currently in place by which we exchange, well, not so much exchange, by which we allow access to beneficial ownership information to law enforcement authorities is a separate and distinct matter. And we shall have to decide how we go forward with that. But we are not intending, by anything I say or otherwise, to step away from what we regard as our responsibility to assist in the global fight against corruption and international crime, tax evasion, and so forth. But the precise terms by which we cooperate, as dictated by the technical protocol and exchange of notes, is another matter. There are aspects of that which cause us real problems and with which we have some issue here. And so we are going to look carefully at how all of this operates over the course of the next little while and make some decisions ourselves. Now, as we regard it, freed from any obligation which we had under the original agreement which set those up in the first place.
And the constitutional aspect, will you be going with something for this discussion, or will you be hammering out that when you get to the UK?
Well, that's why at the start of this I set out what the parameters of the changes are that we are proposing in some detail. And it is along those lines, at least at this early stage, that we would be having those discussions. Obviously, changes to the Cayman Islands Constitution require the approval of the Legislative Assembly here, as well as whatever the UK will agree to. And so there will be a broader discussion around constitutional changes that I've already agreed with the Leader of the Opposition that we will have over the course of the next few weeks.
Is this the first step to independence for the Cayman Islands?
No, this is not certainly not from my standpoint. It's not a first step to independence at all. This is a real effort to further proscribe what it is that the UK Parliament is able to legislate with respect to the Cayman Islands. The present constitution we have, the 2009 constitution, which took 9 years, 9 years of my political career, quite frankly, on both sides of the House. A lot of that time was spent fighting to get to a point where the Cayman Islands legislature and the cabinet of the Cayman Islands were no longer merely advisory bodies to the governor. It is not a well-known fact that up until the 6th of November 2009, when the current constitution came into effect, the Legislative Assembly of the Cayman Islands and the cabinet were advisory bodies to the governor who actually made the decisions. What we now have in the current constitution is a complete about-face in that regard. The Cayman Islands cabinet now has responsibility for every aspect of government, save the special responsibilities of the governor, which are provided for in Section 55 of the Constitution. And they relate to responsibility for the public service, internal security, and external affairs. So in every other aspect, we have complete autonomy. The governor doesn't get to make decisions around any of the, shall I call it, local policy issues. This particular issue of seeking to impose public registers is a distinct domestic issue. The UK is under no international obligation to require public registers, and therefore it is well outside their area of responsibility or authority to legislate for us. Obviously that's part of our overall argument about the constitutional overreach. But it is clear from the way that the UK Parliament is behaving that we, in addition to that, we need further safeguards to limit the ability of the UK Parliament to legislate for us in areas which, quite frankly, they have no business doing. I've said before that the path to independence is one that we need to take. Each step we take along it, we need to be careful and thoughtful. I regard, as I've said in the UK, and I say again, I regard independence as being ultimately inevitable. But I want to be sure, and we all need to be sure, that we are as prepared as we possibly can as a jurisdiction and as a people for what is a hugely greater step than many people seem to believe. I myself have real concerns about the viability of a country of 65,000 people as an independent nation in this big bad world. And what we are seeking to do, and what I will endeavor to do while I captain the ship, is to exploit, in the best possible use of that word, the relationship with the United Kingdom as much as we possibly can in terms of international, the confidence that inspires in business people and investors and so forth, while at the same time restricting the ability of the UK Parliament to legislate for us and push us down roads that we don't think we ought to go, while at the same time ensuring that we meet the highest international standards with respect to everything, from human rights to financial services to international cooperation in the fight against crime.
Any other questions?
Sorry, one more. April Cummings, Radio Cayman. Just an immediate concern that I've heard people raise, their concern that this will cause the financial services industry to be skittish, uncomfortable, maybe make some major decisions about their placement in Cayman. Mr. Premier or Mr. Scott, whichever, What do you say to those concerns?
As I said, and I'll obviously invite Jude to weigh in. But while this is a significant concern of ours, it certainly does not signal the death knell of Cayman's financial services industry. There are a whole range of reasons why business does business in Cayman, and the fact that the UK has threatened, because it doesn't rise beyond the level of a threat, to impose public registers on the Cayman Islands some years hence, which we say would be unlawful, and we'll challenge it. In and of itself, I do not think is enough to scare business away from the Cayman Islands. The greater threat, and this is what I really worry about, and which is why we have to address this, the greater threat is, as I alluded to before, if the UK Parliament, and if it is perceived internationally that the UK Parliament can, on a whim, decide to change local legislation, then we really have something to worry about, because that will truly scare business.
I would agree with the Premier. Certainly from an industry perspective, while we think this is an improper and inappropriate decision, at this point in time, we don't see it having any significant impact on our business. There's a period of time, there's 2.5 years to work through, and I think working closely with the government, I think not only are we going to see that there's a greater awareness in the UK of what this actually means, and also what their obligations would be, for example, verification of their own register. To give you a sense of scale, Cayman's companies register is about 100,000 entities. The UK every year register new entities, probably in the range of about 300 to 400,000 new entities are registered with the UK's register directly, with no anti-money laundering done. In Cayman, all of the entities that are structured are required to have anti-money laundering, which is verified through the private sector service providers. So what we have is there's going to be a lot of work to be done to sort of educate the gaps and really the far superior system that Cayman has versus what the UK has. So during this time frame, and I know an earlier question was, what if the UK comes along to help us early implement? Again, I would kind of refer back to the tail end of that quote that I shared with you, is I believe the UK in its efforts to quote-unquote help Cayman would need to also then follow what they have indicated here, which is the UK government strongly believes that territories which meet financial sector international standards should be free to continue to compete in international markets without discrimination. That would include that the UK itself should not discriminate against the Cayman Islands. So I think to the extent that it would seek to help, I think it would have to be a collaborative effort and not a forced effort. And part of that effort would be in seeking to help the government be comfortable that whatever is being asked for is not discriminatory in the jurisdiction versus other jurisdictions. So I believe as we go through the process, we also take a step back and we look at the quality of the clients that we have in the jurisdiction. These are top quality clients. If tomorrow central public registers were a global standard, they would have no issue with it. This is merely one of the things which has been pushed by certain NGOs that are intended to create sort of disadvantages or discrimination in small jurisdictions like ourselves. Where in large jurisdictions, quite likely, that will never ever be an international standard that they would ever follow. So really it is about us using these 2.5 years wisely. Our clients understand our business. As the Premier shared, there are very compelling reasons for them to be in this jurisdiction with us. We're a very efficient, neutral connector of people doing business from many countries around the world, different laws, different regulations, different tax rules, different customs. We provide a neutral platform that's a trusted platform supported by our legal system here. That, I think, will continue to thrive. And as we work through it, I don't expect that this will be an escalation. I expect that this will actually be the ability of our government to share with the UK government what we really do and how that is superior, and perhaps one of the outcomes is the UK may seek advice from Cayman on how to improve their system.